Yes, again, good morning. We just looked at uh, what is aquifer and what is aquifer performance, and we saw that we can mainly look at aquifer, what is the storage capacity of aquifer, and how far the aquifers are traveling through some tests like test of transmissivity, and storativity. So now let us look at groundwater and wetlands. So in this one, I'll be talking on what is groundwater and and what is the relationship between wetlands, and brief talk on importance of wetland. Uh, the detailed talk on wetland is in one of the separate units in Unit 9 on watershed and wetlands. So we'll be talking in detail in that unit, but for now, we'll be just touching on a brief background on what is wetland and the importance of wetland. So let's start with this one. um, Groundwater is basically the water which is found in the crevices, the cracks, the pores and spaces of the rocks, the mixture of soil and rocks. For example, if you have got sand and gravels, in between sand and gravel, we have got lots of water there. This water is technical termed as groundwater. So let's just read the definition together. Groundwater is the water that lies beneath the ground surface. Obviously, it's ground, so ground surface, filling the porous surface between grains and bodies of sedimentary rock, specifically sedimentary rock, because you know that sedimentary rocks are because of a process like weathering, because of the process of weathering, process of sedimentation, the sedimentary rocks are being formed. And the good thing about sedimentary rock is that it's just formed with irregular shapes and size, and it's unlike metamorphic rocks, which is formed by lots of pressures and temperature changes. So sedimentary rocks are basically rocks which are not formed perfectly, but has lots of pores and crevices and cracks. That is used for storing water, and that water is what groundwater is all about. The main source of groundwater is precipitation, like rain and snow, and the surface water which actually percolates down to the ground and ultimately becomes groundwater. And we can use groundwater for drinking purpose. We can use it as holy water, because most of the groundwater, if you have seen in around the country as well as around the regional areas, regional countries, you would see that groundwater is actually being worshipped by people around. And that's because groundwater looks like it has come from nowhere else, just from the crevices of rocks. And the surprising thing is that most of the people do not know that around 30% of the total fresh water is groundwater, and even if it flows for like hundreds of years, it's not going to get exhausted. And that's like a kind of magic for them. And again, the very good thing about groundwater is that there's no one to contaminate them. Basically, spring water is water that can be directly drank. No harmful bacteria or virus, no contamination, because no one is going to contaminate by going inside the groundwater. So very good for health purpose as well as for spiritual purpose. So that's about groundwater. And again, this slide just tries to explain that natural replenishment of groundwater happens from rain and snow, and percolation of this rain and snow on the surface. So the natural input for groundwater is subsurface seepage of the surface water, which is actually got from rain and snow, and the natural output from the groundwater is mostly spring water, and that's why we say that spring water is good for health. It's just because it is coming from the hidden water which is under the ground. So from that slide, we just basically have to know that what is natural replenishment and what is natural output from groundwater, that's spring. Let us look at what it has got relation with wetland. So groundwater is, if this is the surface and if this is groundwater, if groundwater is quite healthy and if it is rising, if it is reaching the surface, then the land becomes wet, and if it's going above the surface, the land has some kind of water. So can you see the difference? Once it touches the surface, the land becomes marshy, swampy, and if it is going above the land, it becomes some kind of like lake. So wetland is basically, you can see that it's an extension of groundwater on the surface. So a very thin line to draw between groundwater and wetland, but the main line is that groundwater has to be more, or groundwater has to flow out in order for it to be mentioned as a wetland. So this picture is quite clear. This dotted lines are basically groundwater, and this is flowing out of the surface as wetland. So wetland is one of the output of the groundwater. You can say that, but this is not every time. Spring is the most important output of groundwater, but not the wetland. All right. So the main thing is that groundwater feeds wetland. When wetland dries up, it seeks help from groundwater to again make itself as wetland. So when again, another thing is that when wetland has a very good capacity to hold water, then that water is again recharged into groundwater. So it is quite interchangeable that groundwater and wetland coexist. Let us now look at more into wetland when we have known some relationship about groundwater and wetland. So wetland is any land that is wet for almost a year, or if it is not for one whole year, a part of a year. So you can say like 6 to 7 months. If the land is wet and it's happening for for many times. For example, usually spring and summer, if they are wet. Usually, if spring and summer, if they are wet, then every year, if the spring and summer they are wet, then that again land can be called as wetland. It need not necessarily be wetland for a year or long. Again, if you do not know whether it's staying wet for whole year or part of year, the best way that you can determine whether it's wetland or not is through two characteristics. The first one is the presence of hydric soil. The kind of soil that the wetland possesses and the kind of soil that the normal land has is very different. The wetland is because of the saturated soil. The soil that the wetland has are basically saturated, and it has very less space for aerobic respiration. So the soil is basically anaerobic soil, and where you'll basically find very dark, humid soil, a little bit smelly, but smell is not the right thing to characterize the hydric soil. But what you need to know is anaerobic state soil, which is quite black, humid, is basically a hydric soil. And another character to determine wetland is through the presence of hydrophytic plants. So hydrophytic plants are those plants adapted specifically in anaerobic environment, and if there's no anaerobic environment, hydrophytic plants will not find. So there are few plants which survives only in water area, waterlogged area, and if you find those hydrophytic plants, yes, definitely that area is wetland. So two ways to classify. So how do we define wetland? So wetland is basically a transitional area. It's buffer area, you can say, between river and the land. So basically, it's not just river, but even if it is ocean, between ocean and land. So wetlands are transitional areas sandwiched between permanently flooded deep water environment and well-drained uplands, where water table is usually at, look at the water table. Water table is usually at or near the surface, or the land is covered by shallow water. So look at the water table concept over here. Water table is usually at the top or near the surface of usually if it is a wetland. So basically a transitional area between water and land is what wetland is all about. Again, another way to define wetland is an area where the soil is covered by water throughout the year, or if it is covered, if water covers only for a part of year or varying periods in a year. So covered by soil all year or for varying periods of time during the year. So including during the growing season is called as wetland. So transition area is one definition to define what is wetland, and another way to define wetland is to look at the waterlogged soil, which we can find throughout the year or for varying periods of year or for a part of year. That's the definition of wetland, and we have two broad categories of wetland. One is called as tidal wetland or coastal wetland. One is called inland or non-tidal wetland. So in tidal or coastal wetland, basically we're going to see the transitional area between ocean and land. So the kind of wetland that exists through tidal or coastal is quite saline in nature, and you won't find most of the plants thriving there because of the saline nature of the soil. So non-tidal is the one which is inland, inside the land, where we do not have any boundaries touching the ocean. And this is where we have got most of the plants growing, because we have no oceans and salinity properties in this kind of wetland. So non-tidal wetland is again divided into four broad categories. So if someone is asking about the kinds or types of wetland, you're going to answer in four answers. The first one is marshes. So marshes are usually a wetland which is characterized by soft stem. If you can see over here, these are kind of wetland which are basically characterized by herbs and soft stem plants. So basically herbaceous in nature and soft stemmed in nature. You won't find most of the time woody plants and peat moss and other kind of like mosses. Mostly herbs and soft stem plants. So this is where you'll find lots of diversity of plants, because the kind of soil and water property the marshes has is very neutral in nature, and the neutral quality of marsh provides the suitable or ambient habitat for other plants and animals to thrive. So perfect example of marshes can be Gandhi Phobji wetland. Another form is a swamp. So I said that in marshes you won't find woody nature or like shrubs and trees in that kind of wetland. But in swamp, you'll not find again very small herbs most of the time, very soft stem plants most of the time. But what you will find is you'll find forest basically, and uh, you'll find shrubs and trees growing over there. Sometimes it's also called as an extension of forest inside the water. So it's basically the junction between water and forest. So wetland is basically a junction between water and land, but specifically this one is a junction between water and forest. So you'll basically find the forest characteristics and water area. So that's swamp. Um, uh, Now, another one is bog. And if you remember clearly when I was talking on marshes, you won't find any mosses in marshes and swamps, but in bogs, you will find most of the marshes and most of the mosses in bog kind of wetland. So bogs are characterized by a specific group of moss called as sphagnum moss. So sphagnum moss are not very small, uh, very heavy moss that we find on the walls of wet areas in the wet forest. But sphagnum are very unique kind of like mosses, which are quite fluffy, which are quite light, and which is quite leafy than most of the mosses. Sphagnum moss. So sphagnum moss is a characteristic of bog wetland. Bog. So the name is quite interesting. So bog. So and the last part is fence. Again, yes, slightly characterized by bog in nature, but you won't find most of the time the mosses in this kind of wetland. So what you will find basically is you'll find basically grasses in this kind of marshes. So a little bit alkaline in nature, that alkaline in nature slightly than compared to bogs, but you'll mostly find grasses in this kind of wetlands. So basically now four kinds of wetlands: marshes, swamp, bogs, and fence. So please try to note that one. The importance of wetland is that um, let's just take an example of Phobji County, because that's the like best wetland that we have in the country. Um, uh, so if you take Gandhi and Phobji, tourists are attracted there. It's because it's because most of the wetlands are known for its scenery and its beauty, its aesthetic nature. Because when you are looking at wetland, you basically most of the wetland you basically will find one kind of vegetation. Like for example, Gandhi Phobji is a marsh area, so you won't find trees and other kind of like vegetation found there. So basically, very plain, grassy herb, soft stem herb that looks very plain, green, scenery, aesthetic, very good aesthetic in nature. That's where tourists are being attracted. And secondly, the kind of plants that are grown in wetland are very endemic to wetland only, and you won't find this kind of plants growing in normal kind of land. So most of the endemic plants are being hosted by wetland because they kind of attract only specific kinds of plants, and only specific kind of plants can survive in wetland. So because of that, endemic plants can be found if you do assessment of wetland. Another can be the kind of animals that the wetland hosts. For example, Gandhi Phobji is the best place to see black-necked crane. So black-necked crane has special criteria for its roosting habitat. special criteria for its feeding habitat. So these kind of unique habitat is being provided by wetlands, because wetland, like I said, itself is very unique. It provides unique kind of soil. It provides unique kind of plants, which can only thrive in wetlands because of its anaerobic condition, and because of the uniqueness. It can some kind of unique animals like black neck crane is able to come there. And at last, wetland is a filter for the downstream water users. So basically, a very dirty river may come to wetland, but when it passes from wetland, that water is being clarified, because wetland has this huge chunk of soils and plants that can really act as a filter. So downstream people are usually being benefited by the upstream wetland. And at last, just because of everything else, the livelihood of people is being generated with very good economic incomes, revenues and all. Again, let's get back to places like Boomtown, which is basically a wetland. Let's get back to places like Gantipabji again, which is basically a wetland. It's only because of that tourists are being attracted and local economic is being raised, and that's it. These are few of many importance of wetlands. World Wetland Day is observed on 2nd February, and 2nd February is again the foundation day for the Ramsar site, Ramsar Convention. Ramsar Convention is the most important convention to conserve wetlands around the world. Founded in 1971 in the Iranian city of Ramsar, because before that wetlands were being exploited, were being degraded, were not being taken care of, polluted, mismanaged again. So in 1971, people came together to conserve wetland through a convention called as Ramsar Convention, very famous. And Bhutan also entered Ramsar Convention, and we have 3 wetlands declared till date. Every wetland day or Wetlands Day has a theme to celebrate. This year's theme is wetland and climate change, because climate change is real and it's happening. So to address climate change through wetland, the theme is wetland and climate change for 2020. And like I was saying, Bhutan also joined Ramsar Convention in 2012 on 7th September, because we have also lots of wetland and important marshy areas which has to be conserved and which has to be declared through Ramsar Convention, so that we can protect it well. So basically, including the recent Gantipabji, we have now 3 Ramsar sites declared as wetlands of importance, international importance, and in total it makes around 1,225 hectares together. So these are 3 Ramsar sites in Bhutan, and hopefully we'll have more in future. So Khotoka and Bumdaring are also 2 wetlands which are very famous for its scenery beauty and different kinds of plants and flora and fauna in that area. So that's it on units 2. We have covered starting from the issues related to water supply and demand. Then we looked at what is surface water, what is surface water flow, how would we measure surface water flow, like for example, a container method, bucket and stopwatch method, V-notch method and all. And we looked at what is aquifer performance. Aquifer performance is usually being done by 2 methods, like transmissivity and storativity. We looked at groundwater, and the relation between groundwater and wetland. And at last, we looked at what is wetland and a brief importance of wetland around the international community and even in Bhutan. More on wetland is on unit, like I said, unit 9. So you'll be dealing in detail in unit 9. Thank you. If you have any doubt, please leave it in VLE or leave it in messages in VLE. I would love to attend for your queries and help you out. Yes, thank you.